Greetings, fellow travelers, and welcome to the Way of the Showman, where we view the world through the lens of showmanship. I am Captain Frodo, and I will be your host and guide along the way. This is a special episode for me. We are now recording today the final chapter, the final finished chapter of this book that I wrote during the pandemic. We're going to be talking about creating new realities and talking about shows as dialogue. And there is another section that will be emerging, and I'm writing it as we speak. And I will be talking about connections and play as the foundations and origins of showmanship. But this was the final chapter was kind of in taking it to a deeper level to try and understand where did this structure, this symbolic structure of one facing the other way, where did it originate? What in the human capacities, and what human features from deep into our ancient past, where did this come from? And as we will see when I start recording this chapter, I will be talking a lot about play, human play, and play, what it is and how important it is. And as we do, we will see how it all connects up in great depth and detail with what we have already been talking about. But this chapter was only finished during the pandemic. It was only sort of finished in note form, so I know the outline of it. But as I have a tendency to do, I have been starting to read and delve into this subject, and I have discovered some excellent books. Robert Beller's Human Religion and Human Evolution, where he talks about play as the sort of central axis upon which all creation of culture and religion starts to turn out, emerges from. And Marcus Lindholm, a Norwegian author's book on curiosity, also has talking about curiosity and using that to illuminate play and the importance of it. So, and a book on neurology and play, and Peter Gray's excellent book on free play. So I'm trying to consolidate all of these ideas and not get drawn into the aspects of play that we're losing now through the overprotected children, and by getting kids on medications in schools when they don't manage to pay attention. So we are now getting into the last of these chapters. It's chapter 35 of this book. After this we will be it's Christmas when this is being coming up towards Christmas when this is being released, which only is of importance to us who are listening to it as it's coming out bi-weekly. And I know there is a lot of you, but for all those who find it later, don't matter what time it is now. But anyway, for the coming episodes after this, for 3 or 4 episodes, there will be kind of interview podcasts where it's actually, it isn't an interview, it's absolutely conversations with Jay Gilligan and with Gareth Bjorlin from the Pitt Family Circus, where me and Gareth are talking about his ideas of cooking comedy down into a few topics. Or like, can you what is comedy, and can you make an easier, or make it more, can you boil it down to essentials or its ingredients? Very exciting and very wide ranging conversations. But first up is going to be a couple of episodes with that I've recorded with Jay Gilligan. One where we talk about reflex, of which we have talked about before, his show, and this time we're going to talk about not just the creation of the show, but after having done all this work to create it, what was it like to actually do it? Get on the plane with 14 suitcases and arrive in New York City and get the show up and running. So getting ideas into reality, that's coming next week, or not next week, but next episode. And then after that, me and Jay do a deep dive into what is it, what are the foundations, and what does he have to say about skill-based acts, as my acts are often story-driven or thought-driven or emotionally driven, or I have a slightly different way of creating my material. So how does the master of juggling approach this subject of skills? And that's also a very interesting conversation. I'm looking forward to sharing that with you. But enough chit-chat here beforehand. Let's get into the meat of today's episode, this little leg of the journey. Creating new realities. The show creations we offer up for our audiences are imaginary, but it's not just what Coleridge calls fancy, just mixing stuff together and just having like we have a silver bathtub with wings, and in it we have an armadillo which is dressed up as Superman. It's not just connecting together random things. It is the sort of deep participatory kind of imagination, the same kind of imagination that we use to form the mental pictures that we use to understand the real world. It's how we can tell that this is a tree, this is the flower, this is the grass, and this is an animal that's crawling through it. And it's to be able to recognize that one tree is a birch immediately by looking at it, although it is unlike all the other birch trees that you've ever seen. So the world comes at us, and then it enters us through our eyes, and the combinatory effect of all of these impressions become a kind of mental picture of the world inside our heads. Not a full representation of what the world is. As we know, there are aspects of the world that we don't sense, like infrasound, ultraviolet light, and the deep evolutionary and deep time story of mountains, or even trees, and the history of a species. And we always see only a limited aspect of reality, and anything that we see can also be seen from other points of view. And that is not to say that you can just make stuff up, because I do believe that there is a real world out there to be sensed and be made sense of by us. But there is a very real aspect of us grasping the world, which is a co-creative activity. I do believe that we take part in the creation of ourselves, of the world, and also of the relationships between us and the world. So if our imaginative show creations are presented in such a way as to be experienced as, if you can present them in comparable in quality and level of depth and detail to a real world, then our second home, our world of show, which we talked about some episodes ago, then this will be perceived as real by our audience. Well, that's at least my idea. By which I mean that if your character is a one-dimensional caricature and your act is a one-trick pony kind of act, only happening on one level, then it'll seem like a shallow novelty, not worthy of deep interest. But if you expand the scope of your act to include points of interest spanning the scope of human faculties, from thoughts and ideas through emotions and into actions and activities, then we will have a full spectrum three-dimensional show creation. And the richer it is in all these aspects of thoughts, ideas and actions, and then the more it will feel alive, like an organism, which we've talked a little bit about before as well. But it will then be imbued with the interest that the natural world has for us, where you feel like, you just want to watch it again to see another detail. You want to see, not even just to see the act, to see something that you haven't seen before. But I get this a lot with people who have seen my act before, where they would like to see how my act functions in this environment, or how it functions in front of these people, or just see their friends react to it. So it becomes a kind of an organic thing, somewhat living creation in a sense. And of course, the audience knows that your show creation isn't the real world, in the way that the theatre seats or the canvas big top above their heads might be. That's like a real physical thing. Yet, in a counterintuitive way, the show doesn't ask them to suspend their disbelief, or it doesn't need to. Instead, these three-dimensional show creations creates a desire to believe in the audience. The audience leans into the creation. They want the show to exist. And through this imaginative, attentive participation as spectators, they make the dimension of shows, our second home, they make it real by wanting it to be real, in the sort of way that Romeo and Juliet, Tony Soprano and Tyrion Lannister are sort of hyper-real examples of human beings that are as real as any retelling of the biography of Alexander the Great, or Marie Curie, or Mary Anning, the amazing fossil finder and early paleontologist. Like these things, there isn't really any then proper separation by the time you're telling a story of someone. I guess that's what I'm saying here. So it's what we are presenting, the shows and these characters of Tyrion Lannister or whatever, Hamlet, they're not real because the audience will it to be, or because the showman or writer or playwright, or that because they will it to be, but it becomes real through the imaginative participatory process between the two, between the showman and the audience, so that in this desire to want to make it real and the co-creation of this, the characters of Romeo and Juliet or Tony Soprano, Tyrion Lannister, they then begin to be able to tell truths that are more real, and they might even be better conveyors of human truths and insights than examples from the natural world. Through their creation and formation by a human for other humans, a reality and deeper truth, more deeper than the immediate surface level of reality, which of course is filled with chaotic and endless permutations and details. It's like you can get to the core of it because it is 100% artificial, made by a human being for human beings. So I imagine this in much the same way that we can see that a particular tree is an oak, like I mentioned before with a birch. Like, even though in all its individual shapes and whims of growth and responses to its particular surrounding environment, we can immediately see through the individual differences to the essentially oakishness, if that is a word, of a tree. You can immediately see, oh, this is an oak. So this sort of gestalt, as they say in German, like this complete image of it and the spirit of it, or the gestalt of the tree, is in some ways an extraction. No, it's not an extraction. Well, maybe it is a kind of extraction. It could be like it's an abstraction, extraction, like the sum of all oak trees. Is somehow we can use our imagination to see this, and in seeing that we make the generalization into this is an oak tree, and you can see it despite all of the varying differences. It's like we can see the idea of the oak tree. And I think there are similarities in this idea of oak and the great characters in plays and films and TV shows. Like, you're getting to the essence of something. It's particular, but it is also then becomes a representation of all the generality of it. So it's like the particular in the general, and then the general in the particular. So the key thing in our show creations is to have an internal structure or consistency, which has a kind of rationality and emotional resonance, which functions as an invitation for the audience to enter in. back to what I talked about with it, if it has this inner sense of rationality and emotional resonance, and it's got ideas and actions in it, so it seems like it's a kind of an organic thing, then in this process of inviting the audience into it, in the process of doing so, they participate in making it real, and they want to participate in it. They lean into it, like I said. So this kind of creation is, in my estimation, the greatest achievement an artist can reach, as any such creation adds value to the world through enriched human experience. This is not something that was already there that they could have gotten somewhere else. They're getting it through the participatory experience of seeing your show, your creation. And since these creations are by definition artificials, meaning created by humans for humans, I think we could say that their value is enhanced by not being found as products of the natural world. Scarcity increases the value of something, and perhaps not to the world at large, but it is a truth amongst humans that scarcity is something you want, amongst humans, on which the whole sort of world of imagination, and for us, our particular interest, show turns. It's the human truth. It's the human world. It's a uniquely human activity. As the manifesto says, 100% artificial and therefore completely human. Now, let's look at shows as dialogue. I always like to do this. I look at a phenomenon like dialogue, and we've talked about this a little bit before, but we're going to, in sort of wrapping up this, these last few episodes have been about shows. We've talked about all the different other things. We talked about what the showman is, and we talked about what the audience is. We've talked about what attention is, and now we are talking about what shows are. So now we're going to spend some time looking at shows as dialogue. As we have seen over the last episodes, the sort of full concept of what the show is, it can be hard to grasp. It's another kind of Augustinian question where we know what it is, but when we're asked, and somebody persistently asked, like a child or like Socrates asks, then even though we know, when we are asked, we don't quite know. We know that a show is, like it's a bunch of acts strung together, or that it's a theatre play. That bit is easy. But when we go deeper and we start to see that a show is a becoming rather than something that's become, it's a process and not a thing, or that a show is a dialogue, then we can easily get lost. And what I'm getting at is that a show, although being always one phenomena, is also a kind of multiplicity. A show is many things simultaneously. It is all the skills that we do it. It's the character. It's the material that they're presenting, and it's all this sort of stuff. It's poetic. It's a happening. It's just something that happens in whatever. It's many things. So now we're going to focus on this one thing. Like a show is like a kind of dialogue. And conversations can be about everything and anything at all. It can span the cosmos or examine the shapes of a grain of sand. There are also lots of different kinds of dialogues, from arguments to constructive discussions or informal chats to real sort of cooperative, creative conversations. All this. And all of these types of dialogues, they can arrive at understanding and truth, or they can arrive at arrive at those things. Like in an argument, if the two people aren't actually seeking to grasp something or to understand something, then they might not actually be listening. So it's just two people talking next to each other but not actually listening or going towards, and that's not quite a conversation. So an argument is a different thing, but it is sort of dialogue nonetheless. So a show is not a normal conversation or dialogue. It's not quite a sort of tit for tat where one speaks and then the other one speaks in a fully responsive and improvisational manner. A show is artificial in that the performer has prepared his end of the conversation with the audience in mind, in such a way as to please and interest them. A show is like a dialogue in a novel, which is not like a real world dialogue. In a real world, we repeat ourselves, we stutter and we and we are, and we get lost, or we change our train of thought and then end up making completely different points than what we set out to make in the beginning. So like when you're writing something if you're writing a dialogue in books, then you have the benefit of rewrite so that it can actually reflect the idea of what the dialogue is, rather than being a specific real world example of it. So most of the time when you're reading, or probably all of the time when you're reading an interview with someone, it's been shaped, and if it was recorded, even when it's been recorded with sound, if it's been transcribed, you kind of need to clean it up for it to look like a good conversation, or else that is to say, there's lots of very excellent speakers out there who do speak without these things. So as with everything I say, when I say this is the case, then when you scour the internet or the real world, then no doubt you will find somebody who's making a living from doing exactly that thing that I say, that either one shouldn't do or that don't exist. So take it all with a grain of salt. Yet, although shows are different and not quite a normal conversation or a dialogue, there are very strong dialogic, if that is a word, dialogic traits to shows. Like the topic and themes of the dialogue is set by the performer, but the audience has to voluntarily choose to participate in the conversation. They have in many ways bought tickets, which might tempt them to sit through a boring performance, but on the street they are free to walk away if the show dialogue doesn't interest them. And thus, if you fail to connect and playfully engage them in your games, whatever form they take, the spectator will leave. Maybe they don't leave in person, but they might start thinking about something else. So let's continue to look at the dialogue to see if we can gain some sort of insight by paralleling it to the show process. And before we do that, let's go all the way back to I do love the Greek philosophers. I do love the pre-Socratics, but Socrates is an important philosopher. For those of you who haven't sort of looked into him, he's worth checking out. And Socrates was a teacher to Plato, and then Plato was a teacher to Aristotle, so that's quite something to contemplate, that the sort of whole of Western philosophy is born in a very short string of 3 teacher-student relationships, forged very much by their direct dialogues. And each of them, in a literal sense, spoke together with the other ones in a dialogue, and through this their thinking has well formed. Well, it's like they form one of the most fruitful dialogues of thinking and understanding the human nature and the world and their relation. So it's amazing to get it. And if we start with Socrates, then we find that he only dialogued as far as we know. All of his teachings were delivered in conversations. He was just cruising around ancient Athens, and he never actually, as far as we know, wrote anything down. No books or fragments exist that Socrates wrote. We only know about him through the writing of others, and most importantly, we know this through his student of independent fame. We know about him too, which is Plato. But dialogue wasn't just how he presented his ideas to the world around him. You could also say that the core of his thinking and teaching, I think, you could say that it was dialogue. His style of conversing has come to be called the Socratic method, where Socrates, or nowadays any other teacher for that matter, asks probing questions in a concerted effort to explore the underlying beliefs, views and opinions that forms the foundation of whoever they're thinking, the thinking of whoever he's talking to. And by continuing to dig into these things, by, almost like a child, if you keep asking why, then very soon when you dig into them, then flaws and incongruities or inconsistencies, it'll just emerge from the thinking, and you realize that, actually, I thought I knew what I was thinking about this, but now that you ask, maybe I don't know quite as much as what I thought. So by digging sufficiently deep, Socrates could topple the firmament of what his dialogic partner thought that they knew. So the process is great at revealing at just how little we know, or how much we think that we know, yet how easily that the foundation of that is shaken asunder. So Socrates walked and talked, asked endless questions, and ultimately walked the walk after talking the talk, paying the ultimate price of execution for having sufficiently annoyed the wrong citizens of Athens by displaying the ignorance of the high and mighty, no doubt. And he was then executed for being a dangerous influence on the city's young. So, one interpretation of Socrates' dialogic project says that only through real conversation, where the parties involved states their honest opinion and genuinely seek understanding, can one get at the truth of a matter. That's what I mentioned before, like in an argument, if you're not actually interested in putting your honest opinion across, if you're putting across the parties or your work or your stage persona or whatever, then if that's what's going on here, then you can't get to the truth of the matter. Then it's not a Socratic dialogue. So in this sense, a Socratic dialogue is defined as two or more people engaging in a serious dialogue with the aim of arriving at true understanding. And this promise of authenticity and honesty is valid for a showman or a teacher engaging a group of students today. It's as valid for us as it was for Socrates some 400 years before the Common Era. So, if the desire to arrive at the truth of the matter is genuine, not necessarily as an objective and permanent truth, but at least as an experienced truth in the moment of the conversation, then the Socratic dialogue becomes possible. And for us performers, this kind of attitude and method is something which emerges like an evolutionary trait. If our manner of presenting our material or the manners of our character seems dishonest, or like we're having some ulterior motive, like we're not just here to do the show, but we're here to tell them about recycling or about Jesus or whatever, then our audiences on the market square will walk away. They sense some sort of dishonesty, and they know this is not a genuine dialogue. Our audiences seek powerful ways to experience the authentic, truthful, and beautiful. They seek beautiful experiences. They don't want someone pretending to entertain only to realize that they're being sold shampoo, recycling, or Jesus. I believe this pattern and the demands of authentic experience and the quest for understanding we find in the Socratic dialogue is the foundation of all important human communication. It's a truth as simple as it is unobtainably difficult and slippery. So further along the dialogic path, it's notable that Plato presented his ideas through dialogues. Plato didn't just write out his ideas in pages of prose. Plato's ideas are expressed in a similar way to how plays are written, as dialogues between people. One of his frequent characters talking in his writings is Socrates. So around 400 before Common Era, when Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle lived, face-to-face dialogue was the main way people would learn, much more so than writing and reading. As Plato was famously actually suspicious of writing and reading, something we know from his book called Phaedrus, which is kind of ironic that we know that he was suspicious of reading because from a book. But in this book, Plato says that learning from books has, quote, the very opposite of its true effect. If men learn like this, it will implant forgetfulness in their souls. They will cease to exercise memory because they rely on that which is written, calling things to remembrance no longer from within themselves, but by means of external marks, end quote. That was Plato from Phaedrus. So this, here you go, he's talking about that, something we talked about in the very beginning of the inner and the outer truth, or inner and outer geography, and Plato seemed to think that to recall something or to bring it back out again from inside yourself, or to bring something out from within yourself, is qualitatively different than if there's something that came from the outside, some idea that was given to you by someone else. It's kind of interesting that his worries from back then seem to mirror our time's suspicion towards learning from digital media. Real, deep knowledge, Plato thought, could only come from engaging in dialogue, only by connecting with another person face to face, and by wholeheartedly engaging with ideas, by asking the questions that arose in you as the idea developed in concert between the dialoguing parties. Only then could living truth be arrived at. A real back and forth, an utterance, a receiving, and then a response, expressing what arose in you upon hearing, and then taking in what the other had to add after that, always with the aim of arriving at real understanding. This was the only path to deep truth. And it's kind of interesting. It's like one says something, and that arises something, stirs something in their dialogue partner, and then they're talking back and forth, and they're both saying something, yet it's almost like in between them a third thing is emerging, like the actual core. Sometimes it could be actually not quite said, but it's what's understood that arises between them. And this, of course, is now similar to with the how a show emerges between a showman and an audience. And the point, it could not be to attempt to win the argument. For dialogue, it was and should never be an argument. It's not a game intended to be won. It's a game to be played with the goal of reaching truth, reaching some sort of understanding. Socrates and Plato believed that when done in good faith and openness, dialogue was, and I believe it still is, the best tool for learning and communication. If Plato really thought a conversation was the best method for acquiring knowledge, it makes perfect and deep sense to write down his and his teacher Socrates' ideas as dialogues. In the same way, theatre, which was a big thing in Greece at the time, it mimics life and the world. Plato wrote conversations that mimicked what he considered the ideal form of communicating and arriving at the experience of understanding and truth. In this way, the written dialogues served a dual purpose of presenting the method through which the ideas were arrived at, as well as what the ideas was. In this sense, the written dialogues would express something whilst simultaneously be a guide to how to arrive at similar thoughts. So, how can we play honest dialogic games? Working in the branch of art known as entertainment, what we want to express is mediated by the fact that our art is not just supposed to be pleasing to ourselves. It needs also to please them, the audience. And as my friend Jay Gilligan says, and I paraphrase, when performing, you have an idea of what you want to do, and the audience has some idea of what they want or expect from you or expect you to do. And the show is the dialogue between the two. So the show exists on the frontiers of these two desires. For the audience, for the performer, there is a further dialogue between the expression of self and the desire to connect deeply to others through the performance. Like, of course, in the peculiar kind of dialogue a show is, the showman is mostly expected to take the lead, but the others, the audience, only want to come along in the dance if they think that they can trust you, if your motives are, pure, in quotation marks. Like, they want an honest dialogue. If a showman uses song, dance, or circus to teach their audience something, when they expected just to revel in the experience and pleasure of art for art's sake, the audience will become suspicious. If they feel that you're there to do all of this, and then in the end you're going to sell them something, then it's a kind of trickery. It's a breach of trust, and they will spot that you have an agenda, that you're a teacher or a Christian or a shampoo retailer and not a true entertainer. You are there for ulterior motives rather than just having fun in the moment. And there is subterfuge in you inviting them into a game. You presented something with a certain set of rules, and then it turned out that you're indeed playing by other rules. If you say that you want to dance, but your audience can feel that you're really wanting them to learn about recycling, you're not playing by the rules. This is the most often an obstacle. This is most often an obstacle to getting your audience to participate. If the kids watching a school show smells that they're watching something which is educational, the chances are that they sort of close off. You can be reciting Kanye lyrics, talk about the Stonewall riots and the sexual revolution. The topic doesn't matter, but if you are talking about it to moralize, to pontificate, chances are your words, song or dance will fail to engage kids, or anyone for that matter. If they realize you aren't there to just share a moment and have fun in an authentic dialogue, but that there's this hidden purpose, which is to push some sort of agenda, then a teenager, and indeed most kids, will lose interest. And it's my experience that any group of people tend to be less okay with you as a showman when they sense that you have an ulterior motive with what you're doing. If you're a rock band or a magician and your audience realize that you're more interested in talking about Jesus than really rocking or magicking, then the audience will be reluctant to enter your area of interest unless they came hoping for you to only rock a little bit and talk a lot about Jesus. Then maybe they're into it. So if they expect you to talk about dinosaurs, but you're also doing magic, and the material beautifully combines to be both educational and entertaining, that can be okay. In fact, it can be awesome. But it must be part of the game from the start. You can playfully explore mass extinction, evolution, dinosaurs and birds, and connect deeply with an audience, but only when they feel that you are truthful and authentic, that the game you invite them to participate in, that it is fun, interesting, and worthwhile. And of course, once you've started something, a show, like if something happens, some kind of crazy thing, all of a sudden there's some sort of light falls down from the roof, then by all means, the game has just changed. You can now go on a complete whim off onto do whatever else, but that's emerging again from the situation for real, and then the game can change and all that. So it's not that it's completely blocked off, I think, but again, has to do with honesty and expectation, and yeah. Anyway. So there are dimensions, lots of dimensions of dialogue. So written dialogue, whether it is Plato's or any how the dialogue in fiction becomes an imitation of a dialogue the moment that it's written down. Written dialogues are like real conversations, but in the process of being written down, they need to make a different level of sense. A real conversation is more organic and more fluid and less concrete. It's a process which happens as opposed to a thing that you can hold in your hand and read over and over, like a book. And a dialogue is a dance and a development of ideas where the truth is not just found in each word spoken, but in the wholehearted participation in the process. The ideas or themes in an actual spoken conversation develops and goes round and round and round, and each point discovered and shared is often repeated, viewed in different ways, explored and examined by further questions and answers. And in a written down account of a dialogue, these kinds of rambling repetitions are most often weeded out. When you write a dialogue into a story or an essay, you aren't directly transcribing what someone said. Any conversation is perfect when it is spoken, but written down, it looks flawed and becomes flawed as its organic back and forth truth is lost in translation from spoken to written medium. Conversations are filled with ums and ahs, pauses, as we've just talked about a little while ago, and retractions also, like half-presented ideas where you're changing your mind or you're refining your thoughts as you go. And it's got gestures and facial expressions that help sort of modify what it is that you're saying. Like even when I'm reading and talking to you right now, then I'm still gesturing with my hands to better convey the idea. I think that's also like if I stop doing that, then like I am gesturing to make it make more sense, even if you can't see it. I'm sure that it is a sort of a feedback loop here of, because I am using my hands to talk to you, it's also enhancing the way that I can say it. So multiple repetitions of points are being made and all this. So there is a difference not just between the conversations we read, but also in the way that we experience, remember, or imagine a conversation, and that what was really said in the room when you spoke. In your mind, what you're going to say to someone is clear, and you don't specifically want to start and stop and start a sentence spoken in the past tense only to change it to the present tense to make a point. Yet in a moment of dialogue, this is the exact thing that happens, and it got the point across in the best possible way in that moment. But if the conversation was recorded and then transcribed, it does not read well, and it is not experienced as a necessarily as a good conversation. You know, as a spoken medium like a podcast, it might still hold up as it is, but for it to read well, it needs to be cleaned up and streamlined. And we imagine ourselves speaking differently, more effectively, that what we're saying is exactly what we mean to see, with perfectly placed pauses and a natural flawless emphasis. But the truth is that it rarely comes out like that. And luckily, we kind of edit out these imperfections and flaws and the meandering ways we arrive at understanding when we are conversing. When we're engaged in a good conversation, both parties manage to hold the idea in their minds that and all the words spoken does in a sense dance around the idea, each containing the overall goal of expressing the idea, but not in any perfect way. Yet our understanding of it can be as perfect as it could ever be if each word were deliberately deliberated over and written down, and it made complete logic sense. Like we see the truth in the idea, and we experience the understanding of the idea which arises in the dialogue as almost separate from the exact words in the conversation. There's something platonic in that thought, I think. You know, this is basically that there's the idea within the multitudes of expressions, if that makes any sense. So, what does all this talk about dialogue then? What does that have to do with, or how does it all then link up with shows, in these dialogic shows? So yeah, all this with all this in mind, the dialogue of a show is akin to a written dialogue which has been cleaned up and rehearsed to best express the ideas. It's an artificial dialogue that has had the benefits of preparation and practice. Show as a dialogue that's been practiced has taken into account that one part of the dialogue, the audience, will not be able to reply in any real sense. Their part of the dialogue is internal and rhetorical in nature. Sometimes a performer might create room for a spectator or the whole audience to reply to something, but this too is most often more of a rhetorical device. Rarely is the performer prepared for a complete breakdown of control and a change of form into a real dialogue. Further, this is not part of the initial rules of the games of a show performance, although I have, when I'm doing shows for kids lately, something about the way that I sort of am in the room when they come in and how I talk to them, they persistently start asking me questions, and I have to go, now we're going to not have any more questions and I'm going to actually start doing a show. And I do that, and then I say, we're going to get back to some questions, and then halfway through the show or so I allow them to ask some more questions, and I wonder what I would have to do to make a show sort of turn into a conversation also for adults, because it's not so easy. When I ask adults, say, are there any questions, then nobody has any questions. They all just seem to go, oh yeah, okay, so yeah, you balance a spoon and catch it behind the ear, and then you swallow a sword, and now you're sitting on these cans. All makes sense. Everything is normal. I got nothing I wonder about. But anyway, so what happens if you did that? If you managed to morph the show into some sort of genuine conversation, that would be an interesting thing. I don't know exactly how to do it, but interesting nonetheless. So the show situation has been set up in such a way that the idea presented by the performer leading up to a question, it begs certain replies from the spectator. So that's what I mean. It's like, it's not that when the audience is going like, are you feeling good? It's like I've set it up in a kind of rhetorical way. Of course they're going to go, yeah, then there's not going to be like two people going, oh, actually, this is my situation, let me talk about that. So the questions are begging replies from the spectator. In this way, the spectator questioned becomes like an actor who is saying her line. She does reply in a dialogic manner to the question, but she has been so expertly led to it that her answer fits perfectly for the continuation of the play or the show. So we're sort of writing the lines for them there. And there's always the possibility of beautiful randomness being introduced when conversation is open up in this way. If the spectator responds to your question, like what I talked about before, like what happened to me when I asked a bunch of 3rd and 4th graders what they thought was on the dark side of the moon, and a boy put up his hand and loudly proclaimed that Hitler lives on the dark side of the moon. Then a master showman must be able to sidestep this invitation into a bigger conversation, and when it has run its course, effortlessly then swing it back onto the track of his prepared conversation. So I'll go back to the show, which is not necessarily so easy when you've just had Hitler brought back up and you're there doing a show for a school class. But anyway, I did manage to get out of it. So these are some of my thoughts, or this is the sum of the thoughts as about shows as dialogues, and some of these things that you must be invited in. Some of these things we will see as we go in the next episodes after a few of these episodes of conversations with so real conversations with Jay Gilligan and with Gareth Bjorlin. Then so that'll be interesting now. Like I've just talked about dialogue here, and then we will go into actual dialogues where so maybe we can learn something from that. But I find that many of these, the ways that we think about what a what a dialogue can do, like this way of you developing towards the truth of something, but would never actually necessarily speaking it out loud. It's a good thing to keep in mind when we're making something, because it's frequently said that the audience don't want to be preached at. Nobody wants to be preached at. You can get away with a little bit of preaching, but also sometimes you can plant your ideas, your seeds of truths deeper if you don't say it just outright. If you can get the idea to develop. This is of course often done in movies or in books as well, or like as a poem. It's like it never necessarily speaks the exact idea of itself, but yet the whole, when you've read the poem, you know the truth. So all of this, I think it can be really valuable when you look at your show the next time you're thinking about it as a conversation. Maybe some interesting ideas strike you. I hope it does. Certainly does for me. And there we are, at the end of 35 episodes, trying to spell out and expand and look into what the way of the showman actually is. What are the ideas and what are the deeper kind of truths and the deeper structures that we discover when we look at circus, carnival arts and showmanship? Well, I could certainly go on about it for 35 episodes, so there's something here for you to grab onto. And we're going to do a few episodes of a different style coming up in the next, coming over Christmas and New Year's. And then after that, I will most likely have finished my work on play as the origins of showmanship. And after that, who knows? Stick around and find out. And if you are listening to this and you like it, it would be excellent if you could subscribe. Click subscribe, it's free. And, tell some friends that this exists. It would really make a big difference for me if all of you told one friend and they actually downloaded some episodes and got into it. That would be the best Christmas present you could possibly give me. So, until next time, take care of yourself and those you love, and I hope to see you along the way.